Hey, sweet.
Hey.
Hey, and we can all hear each other. I hope, correct?
Yeah.
I see James nodding. Justice, awesome, sweet. Let's make sure chat can hear us. Chat, please let us know that we can be heard. I see a bunch of familiar names. Yes, Ya Fool says that Will Burge, Aiden J. Thanks, awesome, welcome aboard, everybody. For a minute there, I forgot what we were supposed to do. I just wanted to hang out with Justin and James. Welcome to the Arcadia 3 chat. We do one of these Friday mornings here Pacific time after every release of Arcadia, where we hang out with the authors who contributed to the magazine, and we hang out with chat. And normally the way this works, I don't know how many guests do we have, James?
3, 4, or 5. We've had all different numbers in the past.
Oh wow, okay. and today, how many people are we talking to today?
We're talking to 3 today, authors
Okay.
who all wrote articles for Arcadia 3. So
Okay,
Justice
cool.
is the first. Yeah.
Right, because some of the authors live in time zones that make it difficult for them to participate because it's not 11 o'clock in the morning where they are. So we're going to talk to 3 of the authors today. We're going to start with Justice. And the way this normally works is James will talk to the James, by the way, James Introcaso, who is full-time MCDM employee number 7, I think, and who is the managing editor of Arcadia. It's James's responsibility to go out there and find writers who have interesting things they want to say or do in 5th edition. And so James is going to be talking to Justice, who's our first guest, and I will be watching chat, and I'll be collecting any of your questions. So if you have any questions for Justice about his Dreamkin article, and you should, because it's awesome, it's super dope, and there's a bunch of cool stuff in it. So I'm really curious to see what you folks have to say. So I'm going to leave it to James while I will hang out here quietly watching chat.
Excellent. Well, Justice, thank you for being here. And let's get started right in with your D&D writing history. How did you get started doing cool stuff for D&D? And what is it that you do now? Because you do a bunch of different things. Congratulations. You're also full-time doing this now.
Yeah. I walked out of healthcare a couple months back, and I feel good about it. I got my start in mid 2019, though I had been a dungeon master for a while, and I think if you saw the notes for my campaigns, you'd probably say that I was writing a little bit earlier than that. But there was a contest that MT Black was doing for a 1-page adventure contest, and I thought, ooh, I can write 1 page for an adventure. That seems digestible. And so I wrote this just short adventure on a boat called Eye of the Storm. And once I kind of did that, I really enjoyed it. And I just kept writing things and wrote a supplement on Infernal Contracts. And that kind of got picked up. And then from there, I just never stopped. I just really enjoyed it. And it was cool to share my work with other people and to see them use it in their games. So, and now I'm a full-time goblin. That is our real titles at Beetle and Grimm's. There was a fierce debate once about what our business cards would say. And we got so far from it that we were talking about like the Spice Girls. And we're like, who's going to be Posh Goblin? And our CEO, Bill, was like, should these actually say our titles so that people know what we do? And so we reined it in. So I think I'm technically an event coordinator and writer goblin.
Oh, excellent. Well, it is awesome to have you here, and the work you're doing with Beetle and Grimm's and the work that you've done on the DM's Guild is really outstanding. And that's one reason why I reached out to you for Arcadia, right? I had seen you became very prolific in the time that you started writing between then and now. And you put forth this idea for these new ancestries called sort of collectively the Dreamkin, right? Tell me a little bit about the Dreamkin for the people watching who maybe haven't read your article yet.
Yeah. So once upon a time, I thought about doing like a full supplement on sleep and dreams. I always have thought that aesthetic is interesting. I love cosmic stuff and kind of otherworldliness. And So the dreamkin are these ideas that are all inspired by sleep or dream. You have the lucidlings, which are basically come from the similar idea of like a beholder falling asleep and creating another beholder. Now this is the OGL, so aboleths and flumps and all kinds of other creatures could create a lucidling. And what's cool about that too is that your lucidlings could look like anything, especially if you love flumps. You can have one that kind of looks like a flump. And they kind of have this alienness about them. So they can do things like sprout appendages or little arms, or float for a while, or secrete mucus that damages your enemies. Then there's these sand speakers, which are kind of like they're inspired by the Sandman, and they're like Inception people. So they can slip under doors, turn into sand, and when they're within 10 feet of someone, they can dream walk and enter their dreams. And they're kind of a visitor there, get information or plant information. And I thought that would be a really cool kind of role play element for a D&D campaign. And then the last one are these Somnians, who are kind of like these walking galaxy people who are the creators of dreams in this dream realm. And when they're in the material plane, they can do things like create illusions, and they can actually give their life to resurrect another creature and leave them with a memory, which is my favorite ability in the whole article.
Yeah, I've seen that one talked about a lot, actually. This idea that, like, whoa, you have the power to die to give life to someone else who has died is just so rich with drama and story, right? And it's something that I've seen people say that, they're going to use NPC Somnians to make that happen, or that they want a dramatic moment for their character to be able to do something like that.
Actually, let me see if I can find the actual. I want to read. So people who are in chat who may not have seen or read the entire ability, it's the Somnian. What is the name of the ability? Is it the Somnian that has
Remembrance? I think
Remembrance. So this is a ancestral ability that Somnian characters have. Somnian is an ancestry for your character, and like Justice says, there are these. That art is amazing. These galaxy people. Remembrance. You can cast the So this is something any Somnian can do. You can cast the resurrection spell once with this trait, requiring no material components. When you do so, you immediately die and your body withers away in a cloud of starry dust. The resurrected creature awakes with a memory of yours chosen by you. That is so fucking cool. Like, you don't just sacrifice yourself to bring someone else back. You could be sacrificing yourself to bring someone else back and leave a message, like convey some critical piece of information that they need for the adventure. That would be incredibly awesome.
I can see it being used for all kinds of things. Like, if they saw something that you didn't, that they've been waiting and they never got the chance to tell, they could leave that with you. Or even if it's just like a sweet moment that your two characters have shared at some point during the campaign, and like that's the only thing that lives on about them. I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's a great way to kickstart a campaign too, right? All the characters died in some tragedy and they wake up having been brought back by Somnians, and they each have this one message they kind of have to piece together, right? Like, there's so much story there and so many ideas. So why dreams, right? You said that you've always kind of been drawn to this idea about dreams. And we talked a lot in the beginning of this about like the narrative potential of dreams, and how dreams are used a lot in D&D games for prophecies and things like that. So what made, dreams being tied to an ancestry interesting for you?
I think it's partially the limitlessness of them, the symbolism. When you're in a D&D campaign and you're a dungeon master, you can use a dream to seed something that you don't totally know what it is yet. You can leave hints towards some bigger thing, and the character and the player can kind of flesh that out and learn from it, and look forward to those moments where their character goes to sleep, which are otherwise we long rest, we roll, we get our hit points back, all this stuff. But then if they turn, they're like, do I dream of anything? Do I have a nightmare? I think that's super interesting, and bringing that symbolism to ancestries is really cool to me. Like the Sand Speakers, they stop the ability to dream after they enter somebody else's for the first time. So whether that happens when they're 20 years old or 40 years old or whatever, they can no longer have new dreams, but they can still experience their old ones. And so they see these old dreams that could recur for one day or a year or 10 years as these kind of omens. And that kind of puts the dream back in the player's hands, thinking like, what is the dream that your character has every night? And what does that mean to them in the current campaign? And I think that starts a dialogue between the DM and the player. And those are the moments that I love D&D the most. And just TRPGs in general, is when you get to work with the DM and the player brings you things, please.
So you have the first ancestries that we've seen in Arcadia. What do you think are some of the challenges of creating an ancestry as opposed to other specific 5e design work?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the balance between something exciting and something that's not seen as overpowerful. I think 5e has been out, like 5 years now, 6. And with each book, I think there's just a natural tendency to power creep a little bit, that if you look at the newer options and compare them to some of the ones in the player's handbook, they seem a little bit more potent at times. So being able to offer something cool that feels new, that feels fresh, that feels like it's not already being satisfied by something that's already out, that was a challenge for me. And then I think designing something that I would want to play. Like I think adventuring parties are really weird anyway. These are very weird ancestries, but the idea that 5 or 4 or 6 people walk into a tavern and they're lugging weapons, there's wizards holding books, and they have magic items that look very strange. I don't think that these are that weird in that context. But I enjoy things that are a little different, and I think players like to be noticed. They like their characters to feel different and distinct from the world, because adventurers, they kind of are otherworldly in a way. They're these people that have risen up, that are stronger than those around them, who can fight dragons and take on these quests and at times sacrifice themselves for others and something bigger than themselves. And so I think that I don't even remember the original question. I'm probably rambling, but
we were talking about
it was hard, but
yeah,
I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I think is truly wonderful too, as a writer, right, is seeing the things that you write come to life in art. And Ilse Gort brought your ancestries to life. Tell me a little bit about your reaction to seeing them for the first time.
Yeah. Ilse killed it with the with all 3 of them, but especially with that Somnian. It is perfect. That's like one of my favorite parts, especially coming from the freelancer side of D&D. Doing things individually, commissioning art and art at a fair wage is very difficult as a solo person. So
sure.
when you're putting out a supplement, you might get one piece of art and the rest is stock art or something you found, or just boxes of text because that's all you can afford and you're using some online layout process. So to be able to work with a company who can pay these great artists to create something that is like industry quality, great art, people who have done this for years and years and years, it is awesome to see. And it is really cool to see areas where they'll bring up something that I didn't think of. Like, I love the sand speaker because they're so colorful, and it makes them, especially when you're reading this ancestry of someone who's kind of on the outskirts of society, who's seen as an outsider because they violate your unconscious mind, to see them as kind of weird but also innocent. It makes me feel like they're more accessible as a player. Like, I would play that person that looks like me. That is the kind of sand speaker that I would play, as one that's colorful and happy and shows you, hey, we're not all bad. So it's really cool. And the cover of this magazine this time is probably my favorite one so far. And looking at the Weekend at Bernie's spell and everything, it's just really cool. So
yeah. It's one of those things that I think is one of the great joys, right? Is seeing these things and having you describe things and then getting the art in was really a joy, right? Because thinking about what a swirling galaxy person would look like and then actually getting an artist's interpretation of that was really mind blowing, and all across the board, right? Because I do think to the aboleth, you can really see the aboleth within our lucidling that we chose to create. So I want to ask you one more question before we turn it over, which is not Arcadia related, because you have something out there that I think would help a lot of people if they are picking up Candlekeep Mysteries for the first time. You wrote a book that really dives into Candlekeep, and is one of the first game supplements to explore areas of Candlekeep that had never been explored before. So I just wanted you to give you a chance to talk about that real quick, because I know people are getting that now.
Yeah, thanks. So there is a book on the DM's Guild. It is called Elminster's Candlekeep Companion. I was a co-lead on that project with Anthony Joyce, someone who's become one of my good friends in the industry. I call him at least 2 or 3 times a week and just chat with him. It is full of stuff based in Candlekeep. I had a bard in my first campaign who went to Candlekeep, and when I was looking up all the stuff on this, I realized that this is a very iconic location that there wasn't a lot about at the time. And so we set out to make a supplement about libraries and about what it's like to go to Candlekeep and what kind of people are at Candlekeep, what kind of stories, to map out specific towers and give you really cool spells and items. And it's a great supplement. I've used it at my table, which for me to use my own work, it feels, I feel like that's when I feel like I did a good job, is if I need to reference my own material, then that's my recommendation. But it's a great book. There's a lot of people on that: Laura Herzbrunner, MT Black, Enrique Bertrand, Marco Bernardini did a beautiful map of the library fortress. So please check it out. Consider supporting it. And yeah,
it's great, and it really goes nicely with those mysteries. Or if you just need a cool library setting, you can plug it into any game. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Let's take some questions from the chat, Matt.
Well, first of all, David Blake says the Candlekeep Companion is one of the best DM's Guild stuff out there. So chat is aware of your work and already praising it. I think that's super cool.
Awesome.
So we had a couple questions. Like you addressed this a little bit, but James Archbold says these ancestries are so weird and wonderful. I agree. They may have trouble fitting into most campaigns. That seems like a reasonable thing to say. Did you intend for these to be more interesting NPCs or very unique PCs?
Yeah, I could see them being NPCs for sure. I intended them to be player characters, and I think that it's better to have the player character framework if you want to make NPCs, because that's a lot easier to go from player character to NPC than extrapolating NPC information to make a player character of that kind of creature, for lack of a better word. I also was thinking when I designed these that DM's homeworlds are so varied that if I were to create an ancestry that is specific to a material plane, then that can change, like, what their bounds for their countries are. Some campaigns don't have certain races. So to have something that kind of is weird and outside everything else, I feel like it's easier to introduce because you're not shaking the world itself. It's just like, oh, well, what is this? And they're like, hey, I come from space. And the character's like, oh, okay, that makes sense that I've never seen you before.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about Arcadia, and it surprises me when I see people online who are like, this article or this adventure or like these rules that I see in Arcadia are too weird for my campaign, or that I don't have a need for immediately. And I'm like, that's what I love about Arcadia. Is it is not, these are things you're not going to see in the core rules. And that's what excites me. That's why, like, those old Dragon magazines from the 80s, I don't know how much stuff I used to them, probably very little in point of fact, but you were always excited to see what was in there and imagine what you might do with it. So for me, when I see stuff like these ancestries, I'm immediately excited. I think that stuff is great. And that's why I love having the opportunity to do stuff like this with Arcadia, because it's stuff you might not otherwise have thought of. And some of the most challenging ideas are the most interesting, I think. Did you, Justice, have classes in mind for these new peoples that you invented? Like what kind of...
I put out a thread on Twitter the other day about cool classes that you could combine. So I thought that the Lucidlings would be a great pairing for the Artificer, because you could like embrace retrofuturism in their creations. Maybe they have like that ray gun that you see in Fallout 3, the alien blaster or whatever, and you pick an artillerist. Or, I mean, Sand Speakers make great rogues. I think that there are really obvious pairings in there of, oh, this person steals dreams, they're a rogue. Oh, this person has high intelligence, they're a wizard or an artificer. But I think it's more interesting to reject type a little bit and to have a Sand Speaker who's something like a druid. And, if your wild shape can turn into sand, that's pretty cool. If you turn into a bear and you watch a bear go underneath a door, that's going to be a dope moment.
Cool. Yeah, it will. Absolutely would. This is another question from me. What kind of changes did these ancestries go through in testing, if any?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. And I'll also say thank you to the playtesters, because it is so hard as an independent creator to get access to playtesters. So to have a playtesting network and to be able to work with James and James to come back and be like, the playtester said this, and I can say, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, let's fix that. That's a really cool dialogue. So they went through some changes. I think that the Lucidlings could do something for longer before, but it was a little too swingy. If they can fly for like an hour, I think that's going to be more disruptive. And DMs, I think, will be less likely to want to use them in their games if they feel like they're overpowered. I think a lot of the lore information stayed the same for most of them, but I think the lore for the Sand Speakers changed a little bit. It was a little bit more specific, and we pulled it out a little bit so that it would be easier to use, because there's like a named angel in this. And I think before that section was longer, and that angel's name comes from the study of dreams, which is oneirology. So it's Oniris. Basically, I think we cut out a whole paragraph out of that. And then I think that the Somnian went through some bigger changes because they have the ability to cast major image. The hard part about designing a race and making them thematic as this sort of illusory creator is that a lot of the good illusion spells, they really don't hit until about third level spells.
Right. Yeah.
So balancing the ability that when they get to fifth level, they're going to be able to cast major image, which is a pretty big boon, especially if you're a very creative player, to balance that out with their other abilities and even their ability scores to some extent. That's why the Somnian might look a little different. And I mean, the Somnian has that trait that will resurrect someone, and that's a campaign changer built into the class, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah, it's one. Yeah.
Go ahead, James.
Oh, I was just going to say I think that thing about the ability scores, right? Like, why does the Somnian only get up 2 +1s instead of a +2 and
Oh
a
yeah,
+1
that
or
was
3 +1s? Or,
yeah. Lydia C asked, I noticed the Somnian has a +1 to wisdom and a +1 to the player's choice. Is there a reason it doesn't have a total of +3? This is such a noodly question. I love it. Is there a reason it doesn't have a total of +3 ability scores to like the other ancestries? Yeah, Justice. Why is it like that?
Yeah, it's because the Somnian is really powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
the illusion spells in general are very powerful. The idea that you're creating something, and if your character's wisdom scores is high enough, you're going to fool a lot of people with that. And Major Image is a really great spell. So to be able to get that, to be able to be able to do this nightmare ability, which is kind of spell-like as well. You have a lot packed in there. And I think there's a tendency as a designer that when you like something to keep adding and adding and adding to it, but you got to take away at some point. Because otherwise, every other DM, I've had homebrew passed across my table that I've said, this is ridiculous. No, you can't play this. I'm so sorry. It's just not balanced. This race has 20 levels incorporated into it, Rick. No, races don't have levels. You can't play this.
Not yet they don't.
Not yet they don't.
Dan the Bear, thank you for the $5. Dan the Bear says, "What? This is a great question. I think I already know the answer to this. What is the creature typing of these new player ancestries? I assume they're humanoids, but he says, I imagine that it's aberration, construct, and celestial." But I assume James is the local expert. I would say that they are, surely they're humanoid is the type, correct?
Yes, yeah. So they are all sort of in many ways related to those types, I would say, that have been called out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they are all humanoid. When you start to introduce player types that are not humanoid, a lot of things in the game break down.
Interesting.
Because yeah, you need like hold monster instead of hold person.
That's
charm
right.
Monster
hold person doesn't work.
Person, that kind of thing. Yeah.
That would annoy the hell out of me as a dungeon master if I tried to cast hold person on a PC and they're like, I'm not a person. I'd be like, boom. So one of the questions I had was for Justice. Have you thought about doing an adventure that goes into characters or an NPC's dreams?
Yes. Yeah, actually. Yeah. So kind of, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to take my idea. I really don't mind. I'm so busy these days taking my idea.
You're a busy dude.
I would say, so I had an idea, gosh, I think it's probably a couple of years ago now, to do a dream-based adventure called Beyond Rainbow Bridge. We had lost a dog that I was really close to about a year or two ago. And I thought it would be really cool to have like a sleeping stone giant dreamwalker that you go into their sleep to try to, like, maybe these aberrations or something, these shadow creatures like getting out into the nearby town. And so you go in and you find this place, Rainbow Bridge. It's mentioned in a poem that a lot of people who lose pets have talked about. And there would be all of these adorable dream dogs, which is like all these dogs waiting for their masters to come back. And then you work with them to fight like these dream creatures. And you could like bond with them.
That's great.
That would be pretty cool. Beyond the Rainbow Bridge. That's awesome. I think that's it from chat.
Yes.
We did get a bunch of cool questions. I like the fact that people ask some crunchy questions and some high level questions.
Yeah. And I think, Justice, before we go, so Celeste is coming up next, but tell people where they can find you on the internet and what you're doing now.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Justice Arman. I post roleplay warmups every Fridays if you want to use them in your games to get into character. I have a website, www.justicearman.com, and I'm working on lots of cool stuff at Beetle and Grimm's and other secret things.
That's right.
Beetle and Grimm's is Matt Lillard's company, correct?
Yeah, he is one of the 5 founders. We recently announced that we're going to do a silver box for Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. So lots of cool stuff and spookiness in that box. So
I've got the Curse of Straw deluxe edition that they did,
yeah,
which also I did not know this when I bought it, but it comes with little. I don't. Yeah, I realize this is an Arcadia stream, but I like promoting other people's products. It comes with a bunch of little strawed finger puppets. I don't know why. I don't know why it has.
that would be
I don't know
Matt.
why it has. I don't know why it has finger puppets, but
Yeah.
it does. I think that's awesome. So yeah, good job to the
Yeah, we
Beetle
love
and Grimm
that stuff.
folks. I'm super interested in whatever you folks do next.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
sure.
Thanks for having me on here. I'm a really big fan of y'all. I had a lot of fun on this. So thank you for having me.
Justice, we had fun having you on, and I loved your work in Arcadia, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for the great work. More to come.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Bye, Justice.
Oh, and Celeste is
Oh,
here.
hello!
Hi,
I
Celeste.
magically appeared.
Yay!
Hi.
The system
Oh
works.
man, how can I follow up with like finger puppets though? Wow.
Celeste, it is awesome to have you here. So Celeste, you wrote our article in Arcadia 3, 10 spells you need in 5e, and we're going to
Oh, yeah.
dig into those 10 spells pretty quickly. But first, tell people who you are and how you got your start working in role-playing games. You also are full-time in role-playing games, so congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. My name is Celeste Conowitch. I work as a full-time game designer for 2C Gaming, but obviously I do a lot of awesome freelance work with folks like MCDM and Cobalt Press. I quit my full-time job about a year and a half ago. I was doing like sales marketing, and I decided to quit that and write RPGs because that's what I really love. So I spent an amazing year doing full freelance work, and luckily that went really well, and I got picked up for a full-time job, and it's become my whole life and my passion, and I just absolutely love designing for this game.
Yes, amazing. And you do really great work as well. And I'm sure we will talk later about also you are a fantastic player and dungeon master that people can check out on Venture Maidens.
Yeah, I do
other...
a couple things on the internet.
Exactly. But let's talk about 10 spells you need in 5e. So these are 10 spells from older editions that you have updated. So let's talk about this. Where did you get this idea? You've been playing D&D for a long time, right? So you're familiar with all these older editions.
Yeah, so when I started like really DMing in earnest, which is probably about 15 years ago, I was doing a lot of DMing for 3.5 edition. So I DM'd games for that for, 10 years before 5e came out. And, I got on that train. And one of the things I always do when designing now for 5th edition is look back towards older editions to get ideas, because there's so much good stuff out there that people have written and made. And I have so many of these books too. Like, I spent so much money on all of these editions. So whenever I'm stuck with a new design, I love to go back and flip through some of my favorite books from older editions and get ideas. So this article was like, hey, like, perfect, because there are so many spells that I have such fond memories of, like seeing at my table and using, that I wanted to, kind of make a love letter to that edition and bring those here, make them work in 5th edition, and give people a chance to experience some of the fun I had with these spells.
Yeah, and this was a fun one to work on. This has high utility, right? Like, it was like, here's the spells, right? There's a paragraph of introduction about like why you wanted to write this, and we're off to the races. And so let's talk about this, because it is a real hodgepodge of spells, and I think that's nice, right? It provides a lot of variety. So talk to me kind of about some of your favorite spells on this list that you got to work on.
Yeah, definitely. When I was putting this list together, that was probably like the hardest part of this, like narrowing down which spells should go. I had like master Excel spreadsheets of like, spells that people talk a lot about on the internet, wanting to see in fifth edition, as well as a bunch of spells that I really personally loved. And like trying to narrow that down to come up with these 10 was really difficult. But I think what I ended up with here is a list of good combat spells, out of combat spells, spells for different classes, for different applications. I really wanted to balance what we had here. So, I mean, some of my personal favorites that I just like had to put on this list, I was like, I'm not going to compromise. Rainbow Recurve was one that I that I brought in because this is based on Prismatic Bow, which was just an incredible spell in 3.5. You summon a bow made of rainbows and shoot, chromatic arrows. It's so cool. And there's so much choice already built into the spell, being able to like choose your weapon, that I was like, this has to be in there. And it also had one of my favorite art pieces ever from 3.5. And I love that this got, an art makeover in Arcadia. That was so cool to see that come back here. So that's definitely one. And of course, Walking Dead, my Weekend at Bernie's spell. Oh gosh, I just had to put it in there. So this spell was actually a combination of a bunch of different spells, kind of that all sort of did the same thing. That was the thing in 3.5. There were a million different spells to do sort of the same thing, just slightly different. So this spell, I just imagine, is going to create so much fun and chaos that I just had to put it on there. So those would probably be my two favorites on this list.
Yeah, definitely one of the ones that I have seen people saying like there are going to be a lot of hijinks and a lot of weird stories coming from is Walking Dead.
Oh, yes.
And I think the art for that is
it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a great piece. It's a really great piece that Grace Chung, the in-house artist here at MCDM, did.
Yes.
And it is, yeah.
Fabulous.
I want to interrupt for a second. Since there are only 10 spells in the article, I thought for anybody who's watching who hasn't looked through Arcadia, here are the 10 spells that Celeste brought into 5th edition from earlier editions. Attract metal, erase glitter dust, which, like I said in the video, is the spell I long remember. Nature's ladder, permanency.
Finally.
Recurve. Yeah, right. Rainbow Recurve, which you just talked about, which is awesome. Shrink, Silver Wings, Stoneheart, and Walking Dead. So these are the 10 spells you get updated from earlier editions. Are they all from 3.5?
Yes. Well, these iterations that I mostly looked at, some of these have been around since even AD&D.
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
There's lots of history behind some of these spells here. And a lot of these aren't specifically from one spell, but rather looking at like spell areas they had in these older editions that haven't been addressed yet. Like things like Shrink, for example. Like, why don't we have a spell that can make people tiny? Like, why not? So that was kind of, combining the amalgamation of all of these like growth and shrinking spells that appeared in earlier editions and bringing that to 5e.
Yeah, there was, when we started, right, this conversation of like, some of these are in SRD, some of them are not. Some,
Exactly.
but because they don't exist in 5e, we'll have to rename them. And obviously there's this process then of like, things are very different in 5e than they were in 3.5.
Extremely different.
Later editions. So like, I think one of the spells that people like recognize immediately, right, the name is Permanency, but it works way differently than it would in a previous edition because the game is very different. The rules are different. Do you want to talk a little bit about that one, Celeste? Because I feel like that's one we did a lot of noodling with the playtesters and yeah.
Yeah, this spell was really cool to be part of the playtesting process and getting this, edited and feedback back and forth, because I knew walking into it that people would like scream about how overpowered Permanency is. I don't know what it is about 5th edition, but it really brings out the this is overpowered in people. So I was like, all right, here we go. I'm going to have to make a version of this spell that actually works in this edition and is feasible and won't break any campaign wide open. So I definitely kind of worked backwards from there. I was like, all right, what is like the ultimate thing it could do? And I'm like, okay, and what are the limitations we can put on it that will make this a reasonable part of any campaign? And going back and forth on that feedback was really interesting, because I feel like the instant reaction was like, no, wait, this is so overpowered. And then actually seeing it in testing and seeing it work, and people are like, oh, okay, all right, like maybe it's not as broken as they thought. And it's like, yes, totally. So like finding that bridge, that marriage of like function and coolness was really difficult for the spell, but I think we really ended up nailing it. So very exciting to see that process come to its conclusion.
Yeah, that was really fun for me to see, because I do think this is a spell that that could end up costing a player a lot of money,
Yes.
because it can be dispelled easily by the dispel magic spell, right? And I, as a person who am constantly looking for ways to make players spend money, was happy to see like, oh yeah,
Yes.
you could do this, and then
you want it, you got to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really really great. Now, as far as there are other spells then that have some specific use cases in addition to doing something general. Erase is one of them, right? That it's this first level spell, but you can also use it to counter some higher level spells, but only very specific ones.
Like the Glyph of Warding and things like that.
Yeah. And so that was really fun to work on. So what was sort of your reasoning behind that? Because I know people have questions about like, well, why can this counter a third level Glyph of Warding if it's a first level spell? That doesn't make sense to me.
Right. I mean, one of my favorite things about I love designing spells, I should just say, for D&D, and like playing with magic. I think, that lights all of our hearts on fire, when you're like, yes, I want to sling spells. I also always play wizards because that's just who I am. It's what I do. So I really like thinking about the story behind spells and the people who created these spells and then why. And I just, in my head canon, you can bet that some wizard had such a problem with Glyph of Warding, or that one rival guy who was always doing these symbols or whatever it was. And he's like, I am going to come up with a spell to counteract this specifically. And just imagine, like, of course, this spell does have limitations based on, what the types of campaigns you're in and the type of character you're playing. But like being able to, erase messages or, change posters on the walls or, just really keep your eyes out for all these like tricky wizard symbols that they put around. I think it's for a very specific kind of character. And it will just be such a good toolbox spell. I love rewarding players who are clever.
Too, Sorry. Right.
Oh, no, go for it.
Yeah, it harkens back to more kind of sandboxy campaigns where you can, where there are lots of wizards running around and you're going into dungeons and they leave, like you said, they leave symbols and sigils behind. I think that stuff is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love like encouraging almost like seed ideas by presenting these spells, right? Because imagine what the circumstance this spell is going to come up in, and the villains you can make really good use of this spell. And I think that already gives you some ideas for encounters or adventures.
Yeah, and the thing I love about this set of spells is that there are some spells in here, like Shrink and Nature's Ladder and Stoneheart, that are these spells that have, intended uses for them, but they're also the kind of spell that a player could use creatively. I think Erase is one of those as well, right? So Nature's Ladder, it's been fun to see in the MCDM Discord and stuff, how people are talking about like how they could use suddenly growing a tree in a creative way. Do you have that kind of thing in mind? Yeah.
Yes, definitely, because that is something too. I feel like sometimes we all have the tendency to get in a rut of using the same spells because they're the good ones, over and over again. So I really like to always have a grab bag of utility spells, I call them, that you can use for creative situations. I want my spells to have a place in combat, but also outside of combat for anybody who's willing to think hard enough about it. Like, that's also one of the reasons I wanted to put Attract Metal in here too. Like, yeah, it's awesome in combat, but like, being Magneto, like just hanging out like in the world, that's awesome. You can do so much awesome stuff with that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt for questions. But before we do that real quick, I do want to give you a shout out because you've been working on your podcast, The Venture Maidens, for a while, right? Which I want you to tell people about. And then I also want you to tell them about the exciting Venture Maidens news that sort of combines the podcast and the game designer in you. So take it away.
Yes. Yeah. So I have been the DM and producer for the actual play podcast Venture Maidens for 5 years now, 5.5 years. Basically, when 5th edition started, we started this podcast, which is, powered by an all-femme team. And we've been thinking and dreaming and talking about maybe doing a world book for basically the entire time. And now it is actually happening. Venture Maidens and 2C Gaming are teaming up to produce the Venture Maidens campaign guide, which is going to be coming to Kickstarter April 8th. So really, really soon. So taking the process of a homebrew world and setting I created and all of my design experience and now spearheading making a book out of it is probably the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me. So awesome. If that's interesting to you, I'm thrilled. I'm so thrilled. And, working on projects like this and on Arcadia has been such a good way to think about, like, how do I make a campaign setting that's for everyone? How do I make a book that isn't just for people who know what Venture Maidens is, but what new mechanics, what new things can I introduce? My love for older editions, how can we pull that in, and to create a great product? So very excited about that.
That sounds awesome.
Excellent.
I think I met the guys from 2C Gaming at a local convention in LA.
In the before times.
In the before times. It was at one of the local LA cons. So I don't know if they were local to me, but I remember being pretty impressed with their product. They had a couple of adventures out, and they had in their adventures, they came bundled with little plastic minis, but they were like 2D. They were like little printed color, which I thought were really awesome. I thought that was a really colorful and cheap way to make amazingly good looking miniatures. So A+. So I have a couple of questions before we get to chat's questions, because I'm the boss and I can ask the questions first. So Celeste, how did you pick these 10 spells? And were there any? There must have been some that didn't make the list. You must have in your back pocket a whole bunch of other spells that you would love to update.
Oh, yes. If you ever want me to come back and write more spells, I'll do it, because I still have that spreadsheet. Yes, because honestly, the ones that were heartbreaking to cut were the ones that, because I went, on Reddit and forums and just what are the spells that people need? What are the spells that are people homebrewing to get in their games? And a lot of the spells I ended up cutting were really cool damage based spells. So there are some really nasty, especially looking at necromancy and mind shredding stuff. Some really, really cool stuff that I did end up cutting because I wanted this list to feel really robust and have a instant use. So that's why I went more, I think, with more utility spells potentially for this article in particular. But boy, I have some real mean heavy hitters on that spreadsheet that I hope I can convert one day.
Well, yeah, we got a lot of questions from people asking about more spells. I think it was Luke Edwards says, when can we get more spells from older editions? I'd love to have more of Celeste's work in Arcadia. So would we. That's kind of a no-brainer. Justice Arman just asked. I love that Justice is still hanging out in chat. Question for Celeste. As a designer, what was it like delving into the days of D&D's past and bringing these spells to 5e? Are there any older design philosophies that stick out to you?
Yeah, the 3.5. Oh boy, it was a lot of words and lots of really long blocks of text to communicate something that was relatively simple in idea, but they really had to cover a lot of bases mechanically because the rules of that edition got so like gonzo extreme. So really finding the key information in older editions and then paring it down, simplifying it, and finding like one universal mechanic that really works, that it really plays with for 5e is sort of the process you have to go through, because there's so many different pieces for older editions. And
Sure, yeah.
my design philosophy is always like, don't use 500 words if you can use 50 words, and like get the idea across. Like you should be able to communicate this in a bullet point. Like that's my goal. So that was a very extreme funneling process, let's say.
Well, it sounds like you're describing a process almost of like pulling the camera back from the spell description and saying, like, what is the essence of this spell? Before we get into how third edition implemented it with all of these words, because it was like the most robust design possible, but also as a result, the most wordy, because it had to cover all these different exceptions. You pull the camera way back and say, just what is the high level fantasy? What's the fantasy of this spell? And once you have that boiled down, then I think it must be relatively straightforward to then implement that into 5th edition.
Yeah. And I mean, what is so great, and, why I chose a lot of these spells is because they're so instantly evocative. You look at the titles and you're like, wow, I feel like I know what this does already. I feel like those are the best kind of spells, that when you look at it, you're like, yes, there's no... There's no confusion about what glitter dust does. There's no you know what's going to be coming when you look at that name. So I feel like as long as you get the heart of the spell and then you pair it with a mechanic that works in 5e that really emphasizes that heart, it gives it that stage to shine on, then you've done a good job.
Were you worried at all, or in your mind were you thinking like who was your customer in your mind? What were you imagining these spells being designed for? New players who knew nothing about these earlier editions and were just going to get excited to see new spells? Or were you trying to like make players of older editions happy?
Yeah, honestly, I try to do both. And that's my general design philosophy because I grew up playing older editions. I mean, I learned how to play D&D with AD&D because I found it in a box in my garage that my dad left behind. Like that's how I started playing, Right. Exactly. So like that's where I got my basis and like my foundation. Of course, I grew up reading like old school fantasy and watching Barbarella and doing like that generation feels very like my basis, but I'm here like as part of this kind of new wave of designers. So what I like to do is really point and emphasize all the things I loved about old fantasy and then give them a way to be accessible to new players. I want my love of old fantasy and older editions to get people excited, people who've never been part of that scene excited now about the history of things and where it can go. And I want to be that bridge, I think, between, older and newer.
Well, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Trey McLemore, we had a bunch of comments that weren't really questions, just people saying stuff like Trey says, permanency has entirely changed the trajectory of my campaign, and I love it, which I thought was great. James Archbold says, thank you for these extra spells. I can't wait to kill my druid after they cast Stoneheart.
Yay! Stoneheart is so cool. I could not put that in here.
Right. I think it's Nace, Nasse, or Nasse Williams ask, I think we already know the answer to this. How excited were you with the art for these spells?
Oh my God. So excited.
Like we talked about, like,
that is the most satisfying part of publishing as a designer is when, you send off your articles and there's what it is and the edits and, it's gone for like 6 months and then it comes back and it has beautiful art. And you're just like, this is the most amazing feeling in the entire world.
Apart from, this is another Matt Colville question, apart from permanency, were there other spells that were controversial with the testers or that took a lot of iteration to nail down?
I think Stoneheart was a little challenging for people to swallow. I think we got a lot of back and forth on Stoneheart. Attract Metal went through a couple clarification things. I think it just needed to be a little bit more specific. But yeah, I think Stoneheart, because people, again, it was like, this seems so powerful. And then you like stop and kind of look at the conditions and you're like, oh, okay, that's not as extreme as it like sounds.
I've noticed that a lot with the design on the Illrigger is that people react to what it can do, sort of willfully ignoring all of the hoops you have to jump through to get it to work.
Yeah,
right? It's like like they get hyper focused on, oh my god, you can do this, and it's like, yeah, but only like once a week, right? And only when the mood is full or whatever.
Yeah, that's, all player options. It feels like whenever you unveil them, right? It's the this thing that my players can do now is going to destroy my game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see it work, and you're like, okay, all right, I get it.
I'm gonna take another shot at this person's name because they actually gave me a little pronunciation guide. I think it's Nasi Williams. How did you decide which spells went to which classes? It's and then Stoneheart not going to druids or sorcerers, for example.
So Stoneheart is just for druids, I believe. So I wanted to give that to druids as kind of the solution. You know, there are your liches, which are your wizards, who are like, yes, let me put my soul in a glass tube. And then I was like, okay, but how would druids accomplish this without it, you know, with feeling flavorful and in the way that like using the natural world? So that's why I wanted Stoneheart to be something for druids. And then honestly, a couple of spells on this list, I chose them because I felt like these classes needed them. Like Nature's Ladder, for example, I really wanted to conclude this to give to rangers because that feels like such a, you know, like summon a tree so I can scout up above. Like how many times have rangers climbed up trees to see their surrounding? And like, it's a bummer if they can't do that. So that's why I put this specifically on there to assign to ranger. And then Rainbow Recurve too, I specifically wanted this for bards because bards really have a bad deal when it comes to like damage spells, and they have so many just concentration, not damage spells. I was like, let me give them a shiny rainbow death toy, please.
A shiny rainbow death toy.
That's so bard. That's awesome. Like summoning a rainbow to shoot your enemies. Like, yes, obviously. So actually, you know, those decisions really informed a lot of the spells I picked, which I guess kind of answers that question, hopefully.
Yeah, it does, I think. There's also, we get a lot of questions, and by the way, we get this question all the time, even in my normal Twitch chats, people asking about support for the Artificer. I feel like we need a mod command, like !Artificer, to explain to people that the Artificer is not open. Like,
we can't write for the Artificer.
we cannot write for the Artificer. When I say it's not open, that's a somewhat arcane term. Wizards of the Coast has not made the Artificer legally available to third-party companies. Wizards of the Coast decides which parts of their design are open and which aren't, and the Artificer is not open. So we cannot legally provide support for it. So the people you should be asking, I would
do it for you.
Yeah, the same thing for like. So what you should do is you should go over to Wizards of the Coast's live streams and you should pester them saying, when will you open the Artificer? Because we don't have any control over that. So we got a bunch of questions. I'm going to try to pick one or two more. James Archbold says, which spell was the most difficult to translate to 5th edition? Were you surprised were there any spells where you said, I want to do this spell, and then it turned out, oh, actually, this is kind of a pain in the ass?
I mean, permanency definitely takes the cake on making it work in this edition. I know so many questions in chat, like, why did you do this? Why did you do this for permanency? It's like, because we had to make it like work in 5th edition. I think another surprising one, we had a couple things come up with Silver Wings, which was real interesting. So Silver Wings, it lets you fly, and then you can also, because you gain these metallic wings, and you can explode them outwards, right, to deal damage and end the spell. So I think balancing, you know, because there are so many ways to fly in 5th edition, so many ways between like, you know, class options and spells and items, really finding a way to make this spell feel useful in what has already been done with 5th edition, I think was a real challenge. We had to go back and forth on a lot on the mechanics for that one in particular. That's
interesting because these spells also they don't just have to be faithful to the original fantasy of the edition they were from. They also have to sit in 5th edition and make sense with the other options players are going to have.
Yeah, so I was like looking at all the, the class spell list and being like, okay, where does this fit? Can I see somebody actually choosing this spell amidst other options? And if I ever felt like it was no, then I scrapped that idea and came up with something else.
That makes sense. We got a bunch of other questions, but I feel like the spells are so interesting and the utility of them is so high that the questions would never end. So I feel like we're going to have to wrap it up. We got a whole bunch of people. We also got a whole bunch of people. This is not a question. This is just a comment. We got a bunch of people longing for a return of the, I think, only AD&D spell, Sticks to Snakes.
Yes.
I had that. So many people talk about this spell. We just have to do it, honestly. We just have to.
It's definitely, Sticks to Snakes is definitely on the list of, Gary is like, I need more spells. I'm just racking my brain for other stuff. Oh, wait. I remember that one bit in the Ten Commandments movie.
Yeah. No, let's do
or
that.
the Old Testament. Yeah. So screw it. I guess that's a spell now, right? Just because that seemed like it was this crazy grab bag of random stuff they were like throwing in.
Oh, so good. So good.
Yeah. So maybe if Celeste is cool and comes back to do 10 more spells,
I'm cool, man.
Maybe we'll see Sticks to Snakes, because that would I don't know how useful it would be, but it would definitely make a lot of people happy.
You know what? I would make it awesome. I would make it really awesome. Let's make a 9th level Sticks to Snakes
accepted.
And see where it goes.
all sticks,
every
all
stick in existence becomes a snake.
It's now Snake World is your campaign.
That's right.
I love it. Let's move there.
That sounds cool. Awesome.
We could do a whole article that's just then logs to purple worms and this whole sort of turning wood into serpents thing. That we could get on board. So Celeste, where can people find you on the internet if they want to see everything cool that you're doing?
Yeah, the best way to keep up with everything I'm designing, producing, podcasting, etc., is to follow me on Twitter @CConowitch. For the full catalog of all my work, my DM's Guild work, my official publications, you can check out my website, celesteconowitch.com. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much, chat, for asking all these questions and being so kind. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This was awesome, and I'm sure that we'll probably see your name in some other things in the future, maybe. So,
thanks, guys.
Awesome, thank you, Celeste.
Yes.
Now we have
Sam
to trust
is here.
That, Hey, it's Sam.
No.
Hey, Sam.
Hello.
Awesome.
How's it going?
Good.
This is it's like a little reuniting of some of the original Kingdoms and Warfare design crew, because we were all in person once upon a time in the before times.
Yeah.
When was that? Was that the beginning?
Ago.
Yeah, that was. Wasn't that like a month or two before quarantine?
February.
Yeah.
Was it January or February?
Yeah, I remember.
That was crazy.
I went to Disneyland on the day that they reported the first case in Anaheim, which is crazy to think about.
That is crazy. That is crazy.
Wow.
Sam, for everybody who does not know, where in the world are you?
I am currently in Auckland, New Zealand, which is why the sun is on its way up currently. What
time of the day is it where you are?
It is 8:03 a.m. on Saturday the 27th. So I'm
so it's your weekend
from the future. Oh well, yeah. I mean, this is fun for me. So.
Oh wow! Well, we appreciate.
Yes, we appreciate you joining us on your weekend. Sam is the author of the Aces High article, which is, to my way of thinking, one of the most interesting things in Arcadia and one of the most daring, just super over the top and cool. And it's provoked a really interesting response. So folks, I'll be monitoring chat. If you guys have any questions about the Aces High rules for aerial dogfighting, please let us know.
Yeah. And Sam, I'm going to ask you some questions now about you and about Aces High. So first, talk to us about sort of your career as a writer, and how you got started writing games, but also you write stuff that isn't games. So let's talk about that too.
Yeah, sure. I guess I've just been writing sort of forever. Anybody who knows me kind of knows that it's the thing that I've been doing since day one. Um, and I've been playing tabletop games for a long time too. Me and my friends in school played for, I don't know, it must be about 10 years or so. But we came to D&D pretty late. I didn't get into it until 5e, and not until after it had been out for a couple of years. We played a lot of GURPS, which was a fun time, and definitely skewed my perceptions of what tabletop games were for a long time. But yeah, in terms of writing D&D stuff, I didn't really consider it for a long time. I just kind of always been doing it. Like there's always something tinkering away in the background for me, obviously, as sort of the designated DM of our group as well. But in terms of stuff that I've released, I guess as part of a career path, I started with Moon Over Greymore, which is an adventure that I put on DM's Guild, which was born of an extremely slapdash, quickly put something together because some people can't make it to the usual game night thing. And then I'm not sure why I ended up deciding to put that out. I think that some people just said, it's good, you should see if other people like it. And then that kind of sparked the whole thing for me. I consider it kind of an early work. It's a little bit rough around the edges, and I would like to revisit it someday. But I'm still quite proud of the response that it's had, because it's become something that I see people talking about every now and again as like a good way to start, which I think is really cool. Other than that, I did Ashley Warren's Uncaged as well, like Leon from Arcadia 1. And met a whole bunch of really cool people through that. There's a really incredible group of people that were involved in that, and they've all got insane work ethics. And then I think I was runner-up in a competition run by MT Black, who is fairly well known in the industry. I definitely assume that, James, you've worked with MT Black before on something.
Yes.
Heralding.
Yeah. He's a very prolific author and great guy.
Yeah, super prolific. Yeah. And then after that, I did Player's Guide to Capital with you all, which I kind of consider, I guess, a big break. I really realized at the time when that happened that I was super privileged to be able to get into that, because my road into such a sweet gig seemed relatively short. So I just remember being handed House for Later and being like, I really have to nail this.
Yeah, so which we worked on like a million years ago and has never seen the light of day.
Yeah, I often think about how I feel like I've done quite a lot of stuff at this point for MCDM, and it's strange to think that the first thing that people are seeing is Aces High, which is this really weird kind of like off the wall.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, you contributed quite significantly to the Player's Guide to Capital, and then you came out for the first round, the only round of Kingdoms and Warfare design kind of brainstorming symposium with Mackenzie de Armas and James. So you have done quite a lot of work for MCDM, and it is funny that Aces High is the first thing that people know. That's awesome.
Yeah,
it's an interesting first impression.
We're just so people know, because we get questions about this all the time. The Player's Guide to Capital is something that we started working on a while ago, and it was actually a project that I initiated, not only because we had done all this work for the Chain of Acheron campaign on the city, and I wanted to turn it into a product, but also because I wanted to find other freelancers to work with, right, so that I didn't have to write everything. And this was in anticipation of Kingdoms and Warfare. And so kind of the first stab at that was, I said, let's get writers together for a book on the great city of Capital and see how everybody does. So I was and we're going to go back to that this year. The Chain of Acheron will return, and James and I have already been talking about getting those products across the finish line and turning the Heist into a real product and the Player's Guide to Capital into a real product, because we already got like 80,000 words written for that book. There's an enormous amount of Capital already written that no one's ever seen, and because quarantine is starting to slowly lift, and I'll be in the zone for vaccination soon. So we're all anticipating going back to work, in the next couple of months. And then the Chain of Acheron returning. I was going back to the heist, and I was going back to the Player's Guide to Capital, and I was reading it for the first time in a while. I'm like, God damn, there is some awesome shit in this book that no one's ever seen. So yes, thanks to you, Sam, and the other writers. And hopefully we see, hopefully those products come out soon.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I know about working with you on all of these projects, Sam, is that I like that you don't ever think of a thing and say, I don't think we can do this. You think of a thing and say, how can we do this? Right. And I love that. I love that so much. And that's, I would say Aces High is really exemplary, a good example of that. So talk to me a little bit about why you wanted to write an aerial dog fighting rules module that would sit on top of 5th edition D&D.
Yeah, sure thing. It may interest people to know that I have no special interest in aerial combat or dogfighting or any of that stuff.
Don't tell them that.
I get the secret is out. I get inspired by lots of things, like books and movies and whatnot. But I think the thing that I am inspired by most consistently is probably music. So that article and the whole idea behind it directly came from the Iron Maiden song that it is named after.
That's funny because it's because I'm the one that put the Easter egg link into the document.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so I don't know if folks have noticed. I just gave it away. I was going to ask this as a question for chat. I was going to ask if anybody had found it. But if you go to Arcadia 3 and you go to the Aces High article, you can click on the title. The title Aces High is a hyperlink that will take you to a music video.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't actually know that the link was in there in the final product, but
it is. Yes.
So I've been listening to that song for ages and just walking around thinking about dragon dogfights and being like, there's something here. I've got to it won't leave me alone.
Man, that's the coolest fucking thing in the world, right? Is to I this sounds so noodly, but I think there are actually quite a lot of dungeon masters out there that have been inspired by music, by songs, and specifically by Iron Maiden. Like I ran an entire adventure based on the album Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. So yes, I have deep sympathies there. I think that stuff is really cool.
Yeah, I have a lot of adventures and stuff that I'd like to write based on stuff from Power Slave.
It's a great album. It's a great album.
Yeah, well, so this is right. This is something that I saw and I was like, yeah, I would love this, because I do think we get in a lot of situations in D&D where we want to do this thing, right? We want to do this very dangerous, high-flying thing, but it just kind of feels like we're doing the same thing, right? With maybe you can get pushed off a cliff, or everybody can fly, and so it doesn't really change things that much. And I think this rule set really brings gravity and velocity into play in a way that isn't complicated or intimidating, right? Like we could very easily be getting out protractors and that kind of thing, and that's not at all what this system is. So what were some of the challenges in bringing in the excitement of dive bombing and falling through the air and that kind of thing, while also making it an accessible system that people could easily drop into their games?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was hard. it really was difficult to balance the kind of the speed that I wanted to capture with it being approachable. I did a ton of research into other aerial combat games, and like you said, a lot of them do just straight up include protractors, and you really have to figure out turning arcs and stuff like that. And it was so antithetical to what I was trying to achieve, which is that I really wanted it to be cinematic. And even now, I think that one of the things that made that really difficult to get to as well is I have a lot of empathy for Matt now talking about trying to design for someone else's system, because the thing that I kept bumping up against was like, I do have to get this to play nice with 5e though, and like the action economy and stuff like that. So I think that was probably actually the most difficult part of it. And I didn't really predict that when I started. So this is kind of a classic case of an issue that I run across every now and again in my life, which is that my eyes are bigger than my stomach, and I'm like, I'm just going to totally bite off more than I can chew.
Same.
Yeah. It's and I think this is one that like you poured a lot of work into, and there's probably about, I don't know, 8 or 9 different versions of Aces High somewhere in your files,
Yeah.
right? At least that I've seen. Who knows how many you probably worked on yourself and reiterated.
It's like 2 or 3 more.
Yeah. So what was that like throughout the process? Because you and I worked on it, and then we worked on it with Matt, and then we worked on it with the playtesters and stuff. What would you say are some of the huge things that changed, that surprised you when, like you were like, oh, this will definitely be part of it, and wasn't, or this won't be, and then did become, that kind of thing?
Good question. There were a couple of big things that changed. The experience of it kind of evolving was a really positive process. I think I really enjoyed it. I always enjoy working with you, James. I think that we have a good rapport. I really like that I can kind of pitch anything, and then it's your job to make it actually usable, and there's no judgment. But
I like working with you because you pitch things that I would never think of, and I'm like, this is so cool, let's do it. It's great.
Oh, good. What was I saying? The process of it changing over time, it was really good. So working with the testers was really cool. That's the first time that I've got the chance to work with like a big kind of established stable of testers. And some of the feedback was great. It was super varied too. There was a lot of feedback that I kind of was like, it highlighted things that I decided I wanted to make more explicit as part of the design intent, so I could go back to the text and be like, this is on purpose. But then there was also a couple of things that, like one of the testers I think at some point said, you're telling me that this is supposed to be fast, and it's not really. And I was like, you're absolutely right. And that was such a big design goal for me that I was like, I ended up cutting the pack, which was kind of a relatively big part of it. So for the viewers at home, Aces High has an altitude scale, but it also used to have a back and forward scale called the pack, which was essentially a measure of who's chasing who. And it just got super complex, and not everybody has minis that they can put in a line. So we ended up cutting it, which I think was good because it meant that I could introduce angles, which is something that I'm super proud of. I think that angles are cool and fun.
Yeah.
That mechanic is really cool.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I saw a lot of people saying, and I think I had this reaction when you first put angles in front of me, was like, this is too many actions. You can't take more than one action. And you were like, it'll be fine. And it was.
Yeah, I hope it's fine. It is a lot of actions.
Yeah, it is.
I think it is.
People seem to like it.
So. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, also, the tester. I remember the testers pushed really hard on this because it is such like a self-contained, almost like game unto itself. Do you remember there were the scramble dice was one of the most like, this is really cool, and then the testers were like, I don't know if this works.
Yeah, I do remember that. I totally forgot.
Yeah, the original design, as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, and also correct me if I'm wrong about what made it into the final article, but the original design was all the players in the dogfight were all going to roll like a 20-sided die into a pool, and then they were literally like live in real time going to grab dice out of that pool, right? In order to, so it was and on paper, that sounded really cool to me. I was like, this is going to be awesome. And the testers were like, do you know how crazy this is?
yeah.
Pesto Enthusiast, who's was probably our lead tester, says we broke Sam's heart.
I was so scared on that. I totally forgot about that. But I was like, oh no, look, there are good reasons to not do this. In the original text as well, there was advice for like make sure you don't hurt your friends when you all grab the dice off the table.
Yes. Well, it was
Yeah.
it was a super distinctive, it was very immersive, right? It was a very immersive game mechanic in that it would simulate, scrambling to your mount, right? Because Aces High is all about you're flying on another creature, probably ideally dramatically a dragon. And so that idea of like dashing to your mount and trying to get into the air first was to me really immersive. And when I read that in your pitch, I was like, that's just super cool. I love that. I think that's why like you and I are on a very similar wavelength when it comes to this stuff. And then you just run headlong into the giant brick wall of testing, and the testers are like, this is insane. Like, do you know how complex this is? And it's like, yeah, actually, now that you start thinking of like all the edge cases, all of the ways that could go wrong, like even physically across a table, like I'm sitting way far away, so I'm at a disadvantage. What the fuck? There's all sorts of stuff in there that you're like, oh man, you got to like they say, you have to kill your darlings, right? Some of the stuff that excites you the most when it doesn't, when the rubber hits the road, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You did a really good job, by the way, Sam, I thought, of handling the testers' feedback, because I think it would have been very easy. So far, all of our writers have been awesome with the testers, because you would be well within your rights to just dig in and say, hey, it's my article, right? It's my article. This is my vision for it. But you really went where the testers, you really responded well to the testers' feedback.
Yeah, I tried to take it as seriously as I could. There were definitely a couple of things that I didn't budge on, or that I was quite pleased with the kind of controversy that they created. For example, I think that's my favorite feedback was for Fangs Out, which is one of the gut moves, because some testers came back and they were like, this is way too good. Why wouldn't you use this all of the time? And then some of the other testers came back and they were like, this is terrible. Why would you ever do this? The trade-off is way too high. It's like, oh, perfect. Yep. James was like, sounds balanced to me.
Yeah, I wish I could sometimes, this happens to me on Twitter all the time, or in YouTube comments, where someone will say, this is a terrible idea, no one would ever do this, and then someone else is like, I've already done this 4 or 5 times and I love it, and I'm like, I just want to take you two people and put you in a room and you guys fight it out, and then come let me know who wins, right? Because it's obviously there isn't consensus. I feel like we're going to go over our time. Yeah. Oh, we got questions. But actually, for we haven't had a lot of people. I think this is probably because it is its own little mini game, and so until people have used it, I think that's where a lot of the questions are going to come from. And I think people haven't got a chance to use it yet because the magazine just came out 2 days ago. But I would like, if you're willing to, Sam, could you pitch us these rules? Give somebody who hasn't read Arcadia, or somebody who hasn't gotten to that article yet, what is the high level description of how these rules work and what they do?
I guess the idea is kind of abstract, edge of your seat, high flying, dogfighting mechanics that really drive home the idea that if you're going to try to fight something in the sky, you better know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Is there a core mechanic to Aces High that you could describe to people?
Yeah, I think that the angles are probably now the core mechanic. The other core mechanic is probably altitude. So the two things that are big in terms of design are everybody who's in the air has a dice, which is your altitude die, and it measures how far off the ground you are. The bigger the number is, the higher you are. If you go too high, you might pass out and fall unconscious and then maybe die. And if you go too low, you hit the ground and probably also die. So there's like a balancing act of trying to stay safe in terms of altitude, but then altitude is also a huge tactical advantage. So there's always this tug of war as well, where you're trying to like stay above your opponent and not let them get above you. And then you can also speed up the whole process of trying to drive your opponents into the ground by using angles. So the faster you are, the more stunt dice you have, and the more stunt dice you have, the easier it is for you to roll them to make angles, which is kind of like a hand of cards. Sorry. So you roll all these dice, and then you have to match either 3 of a kind or 3 in a row. So like they're D4s, so 3 2s would be an angle, and 2 3 4 would also be an angle,
Right.
which is an idea that I kind of just stole from classic dice games, because I was like, I really wanted the core mechanic to be something that was fun on its own merits, which is really difficult to do a lot of the time in tabletop games. So I pinched that because I was really into Ship Captain Crew at the time, which is a game that you should definitely check out if you played D&D. Good.
What's it called?
Oh, nice.
Ship Captain Crew. It's one of those dice games that probably has multiple names in multiple places in the world, but I think if you Google Ship Captain Crew, you'll find a Wikipedia article about it. It's a good dice game to drop into cabins.
That's cool. Do you have ideas for new potential gut moves?
Not at this stage. I could come up with more of them, I think. But this is definitely something that I did to sort of get out of me. I was compelled, and then I was now I need to delete Aces High from my brain so that I can make new stuff.
So you can do other stuff. I get that.
I did make a cheat sheet though. People are interested.
I mentioned that there's you tweeted a link to so hopefully maybe we can get a mod, our long suffering mods, to find us a link and paste it in chat. But I think we'll probably also, with your permission, include it with this will be a strange inclusion to our community creations post that we usually do after every Arcadia issue, just to give people links to what folks are doing with it. And you came up with a cheat sheet for like how to use this system that people seem to like. So, and you put it on Twitter, which is awesome. Justice Arman says, I love that Sam incorporated the difficulties of breathing in high altitude into the rules. It's really thematic and creates a cool trade-off. I agree. There's a lot of really flavorful, like the Aces High is all about capturing that feeling of being a dogfighter. So the idea of high altitude being dangerous makes perfect sense.
And it is a dangerous rules module. Like you often defeat your enemies by making them crash and burn, or pulling out. Right? Like there's that idea of like this is a game where I could see players giving up and trying to fly away. So and
even that is pretty risky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to do. It's hard to leave. I think one of the things I really like about this and is that when we'll get feedback, right, from a playtester, or I'll give Sam feedback, right, and say like, oh, like I think this is going to do this, and Sam will say, that's what I want to happen, right? There are all these little explanations within Aces High that I think are great that say like, yes, you're playing the game correctly if you feel this way about this, right? If you feel the threat of death when you're falling, all that kind of thing. And I really appreciate that because I think it subverts some of our superhero-like expectations we have sometimes with 5th edition D&D characters, which is great.
Sam, you talked about starting with GURPS, with not with D&D, and I suspect, I don't have any data on this, but I suspect that a majority, I would guess, of the MCDM community are super D&D focused. So what, like, for those people in chat who don't know anything about other games, would you recommend GURPS to folks? And like, what kind of players do you think would like GURPS?
I don't know if I would recommend it. Well,
I don't know if I would recommend it. I was young. I didn't know any better.
Yeah. We played GURPS because my friend's dad had all the books, and so we didn't have to pay for anything.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. That's a good reason.
Yeah.
GURPS, I will say, GURPS is, I don't know when that game came out. I guess the 90s. That's the
80s. No, GURPS came out. No, yeah, GURPS came out in the like early 80s, early mid 80s.
my friends and I decided
think.
after playing GURPS for a long time that it's really, really fun to make stuff in GURPS, because the whole idea for GURPS, it stands for General Universal Role Playing System, and the whole idea is that you can do anything in it. The books are massive. They have super exhaustive lists of everything. And so you can do fantasy, science fiction, detective stuff, like everything. And we played a couple of campaigns that were really fun, but ultimately it is a super, super crunchy system. I think it has a reputation for it. And the example that always comes up is, oh, someone's calling me. Stop. I think there's like an example that people always talk about where you have to calculate damage for separate pieces of shrapnel if you fire a shotgun or something like that, which is ridiculous. Nice. So if you're into that sort of thing, maybe check it out. It's always fun to make stuff in that game. But we played a lot of other stuff as well. We played some Fallout D20, and we actually made a couple of games that we ended up playing. So I guess that was kind of the start of my career as a designer.
Yep, absolutely. Mike Kavanaugh asks, were there any genre conventions for aerial combat from history or movies that inspired you? Like apart from the Iron Maiden song, were there any visuals you had in your mind from movies or anything like that that you were trying to capture?
There are definitely a couple. Nothing hugely in particular. I actually have not seen Top Gun.
People asked about that in chat. No, it's bad. It's not a good movie.
All right. Good to know. But there are some movies that I've seen that I think I was probably unconsciously pulling from. But I did end up doing a lot of research, less into, I guess, the historical or like genre conventions, and more into the physics of it, which is not super typical for me to get super invested in finding out how like the thrust to weight ratio works and how dogfighting has evolved since it began and how it works now and stuff like that. But I did end up getting super deep into, I guess, more the culture of the people who do it, which is a very weird culture, I guess, because that's where a lot of those terms came from. Like the Gutmers are named after the sort of jargon that fighter pilots use. I don't know if they still use that stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, do we have fighter pilots anymore? Everything's drones now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I love about working on fantasy and science fiction is when you're inspired by the real world and you end up doing a lot of just research. And like every game I've worked on, including video games and tabletop games, every game I've worked on, I ended up doing an enormous amount of research in the real world to try to kind of get exactly like you're saying, just get a feel for what people who really do this, how they think and what they say.
Yeah. So
it's one of the things that makes this industry fun.
I think nothing super in particular, but there's definitely some stuff knocking around in there. I've been watching Battlestar Galactica at some point too. There's a lot of dogfighting in that.
There is. It's true.
Yeah,
yes,
space
absolutely. Yes. Well, I think we've had Sam for about half an hour now, which is the allotted time, and he had to wake up early to do this.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. So, Sam, for people who want to follow more about you, and I think it's safe to say you're going to see more from Sam in the future. Obviously, worked on some Kingdoms of Warfare, and we may or may not have been cooking up some other stuff that playtesters might see soon. But Sam, where can people find you?
I think the best place to follow me is probably Twitter. Where you can find me at Cryptic Parler, Parler with a U. That is also the name of my website. I haven't updated it super frequently, but as more stuff comes out, I'll definitely be putting stuff there as well. But yeah, Twitter is probably the place to keep up with me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for waking up early on a Saturday. No less.
Saturday
to come
in the future.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This was great.
Sam, it was great seeing you again.
No problem.
Bye. Yay, thank you, Jerry. Hats off to Jerry. Jerry, it's so awesome that Jerry's completely behind the scenes. He's making all this happen. He's the one that pulls people down and puts the next person up, and it happens so seamlessly. God, it feels so pro. Jerry is killing it. These live streams are great.
Yes, yeah, you're doing an amazing job, Jerry. So thank you so much. And I just want to give one other shout out to Allison Huang, who is the author of A Diamond in the Rough, which is the adventure that's in Arcadia. She's in Australia, and she said it would be hard for her to get here. But go check her out. She's Drazillian over on Twitter, and she does a lot of stuff. She's got stuff on the DMs Guild. She's in the new Candlekeep Mysteries book that Wizards of the Coast just put out. She's a great writer, so definitely check out her stuff as well. And chat. Thank you for asking so many great questions.
Thanks.
This was a really
thanks everybody
fun
for
one.
coming and hanging out. I mentioned this in chat, but if you folks have any questions that are not Arcadia related, you should come follow us on Twitch /MCDM, because we do live streams. I hang out on Twitch a couple times a week, and we just talk about whatever. So if you have any questions about other MCDM stuff or D&D or just anything in general, come by Twitch. And I think you folks will get a new running the game video maybe next week.
Nice.
I'm working on a script about railroading that has turned into a whole thing. It's turned into a script where I had to change the name from just railroading to railroading agency and choice, because we get into a whole bunch of stuff about player agency, player choice, about open world games, about sandbox games, and it's turning into, I thought it was going to be I literally thought this is going to be like an 8-minute long video, and it's already like going to be at least 20 minutes, if not more. So hopefully that's next week. If not, you'll get it even sooner, or you'll get it later.
Nice.
The opposite.
I'm looking forward to that. And also next week coming, there will probably be an Arcadia survey in the Patreon. So those of you who are patrons of MCDM, you'll get a chance to give feedback on the first 3 issues of Arcadia. So and it's going to help us a lot planning future issues and other stuff at MCDM. So check that out when it drops. But also railroading. I'm excited, Matt. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, well, it's because I did a video a couple weeks ago about how to engage your players, and people complaining that their players don't. They complain that their players just show up to have fun, and they don't care about the world the dungeon master has built. How do I get them to care? How do I get them to engage with my fiction and my lore? And I was like, you gotta give them no choice. You gotta chase them up a tree. You gotta back them into a corner. And I gave examples of all these great action heroes from movies, because action heroes in film are reactive, right? They react to things. They're not generally proactive. And when I said you got to give them no choice, right? Like the only thing that will stop this bad guy is this kryptonite that's in this forest, and you got to go talk to the elves. And now they're going to care about the elves because and people are like, isn't that railroading? And so I thought that was a really good comment. We got a lot of people in the chat or in the comments to that video saying, isn't that railroading? And I was like, no. And if you think it is, then I definitely need to do a video on what railroading is and why it's bad, right? Like, because I think that like there's a tendency when we, especially with some of these legacy terms that have been around for decades, where the terminology changes and shifts over time, so that there's like a category of behavior, and then there's this one specific version of it that's bad, and we come up with the term for that. But over time, it migrates to describing the entire thing. It's like, no, railroading is bad. And why, and how it's not necessarily related to player choice, but how it is related to player agency. And that's why I was like, oh my God, this is turning into a whole like philosophical thing, which I love. I love writing that stuff, but I didn't think that was going to happen. I literally thought, I'm just going to say, here's what railroading is. Here's why it's bad. Don't do it. Peace out. And then that's not what's happening. That's very much not what's happening. So somebody was asking about how we source Arcadia. Hitomi Salazar, who actually asked a bunch of good questions in chat, said, how do we decide who to work with? Do we take submissions? There is a Patreon post. It's public. Anybody can read it, where we explicitly describe the process of becoming a writer for Arcadia. And the short answer is James, pays attention to which authors out there have established reputations for being creative and reliable freelancers. And then he reaches out and contacts them. So step 1, go become a reliable and creative freelancer.
Yes, yeah, and I'm always trying to scour places and find new individuals in different marketplaces and things like that. So I love reading role playing game products. So I really do like to dig in there and see what's out there and read people's stuff.
Thanks to the mods have posted a link to the how we source our articles, how we source our authors post. So that's super good. Adam McLaughlin says, that will be me. I swear it. I believe in you, Adam. Keep up the good work. James, once again, you make these live streams really easy for me. All I have to do is hang out and watch chat. Thank you very much for agreeing to host these and for being such a good host. You ask great questions. And I love focusing on these creators and asking them not just about their article, but also how did they get started in the business and what other stuff are they working on? Because like I said, I think a lot of people in the MCDM community, they only know what they hear from us. So it's sort of our responsibility to therefore let them know that these authors are all working on great stuff for other companies. They have stuff up on the DMs Guild. They often post really thought-provoking, like Justice all the time is posting really thought-provoking threads on Twitter. So thank you very much, James.
Absolutely.
You're killing it.
Well, thank you. And it's important that these authors have this space and have this freedom. And I don't think a lot of places do this. There aren't a lot of publishers who would encourage this kind of thing. Like, come on and plug your other stuff, Yeah. And also, but just one of the things that's great about Arcadia, right, is that there are a lot of people who sit down and say, I've had this idea for years. I've wanted to write this, right? And this is a great place for me to do it and get great art and that kind of thing. So so thank you, because Arcadia is your idea. And you really do take a big step back and let the writers have control of their articles, which is really great. They're I don't know anywhere else where you can really do that.
Well, I mean, I like I'm a very simple person. People keep giving us money and I want to turn it into dope shit. It's that straightforward. So all the support that people give MCDM, including stuff like super chats in stream or subscriptions on Twitch or backing us on Patreon, or obviously going to our store and buying our products. All I want to do is take that money and turn it into more cool stuff for the community. And Arcadia is a big part of that. It's a huge success, which means we get to keep doing it, and we get to keep featuring other people's amazing stuff. And because it's not official, because this is not an official 5th edition product, we can do stuff that's really cool and interesting and a little bit out there. Like a lot of the stuff in Arcadia is it's the best kind of creative content, right? Because it provokes strong reactions. People are like, this is really cool. And other people are like, I can't imagine ever using this. And that to me is the kind of stuff I want to be working on. I was, like I said, I was in video games for 15 years, and the stuff that anything you come up with, any new idea you come up with that really excites people is also going to really turn people off. The only thing that doesn't do that is just oatmeal. Just completely bland, right, flavorless, meaningless stuff. No one has a strong reaction to it. And in more toxic industries like video games, that tends to be what succeeds. That tends to be what ends up in front of the player, is the most safe, boring version of whatever cool idea you had before. Because having a cool idea means some people get really excited by it, but that same thing that excites them turns off other people because it's new or it's novel or it's different from what they're used to. And Arcadia is exactly the kind of medium. It's the kind of product that can feature really interesting stuff. And so far, literally everything in Arcadia I have been excited by. So
yeah, I totally agree.
James.
Well, thank you, and good job to you too, because really, I worked in television for a while, and it's the same sort of process, right? That by the time every executive producer and marketing exec has had their hands on something, it becomes oatmeal by the time it comes out. Yep. And I think really good bosses and really good leaders say, like, let's take this risk. It's worth the risk to see how this winds out, and it's calculated. You're not running the company into the ground or anything like that. But
well, I mean, it's working so far.
We got to do. Yeah, exactly. The fact that we got to do Aces High and the Dreamkin, right? That's wild and great stuff.
Yeah, and some of the earlier adventures, right, in issues 1 and 2 that have these kind of outside the box technological themes to them is really cool. Like, I love that stuff. Yeah, I want people to get excited for the next issue of Arcadia, not because they feel like, oh, I will certainly be able to use everything in this issue. No. I want you to be excited for the next issue of Arcadia because of all the thought-provoking stuff that's going to be in it, right? You're going to open and be like, I never would have thought of this. This is really cool, right? And yeah, not every campaign is going to have aerial combat in it. Not every campaign is going to be well suited for these kind of almost high fantasy ancestries. But when I read that stuff, it makes me wish my campaign had that kind of stuff in it. So anyway, what is the next, before we leave, what does the timeline look like for the next issue's release? I have no idea, but I think there is a chance that it will come out in May. I think it's possible that you won't actually have a month gap because we're definitely doing the Ill Rigger next month, which is a huge meaty chunk of content that is going to be presented basically in the Arcadia format, right? Patrons will get it if you're at the $5 or $10 level, and it will be available in our store. And then a month after that, I think maybe we'll have the next issue ready.
Yeah, so those articles are in testing now.
Okay. So it's going to be a test. It's going to be a test of our art direction pipeline, or rather, I should say, our art pipeline, which is actually really a test of our production pipeline, because I think that's the one place MCDM is currently understaffed, is production. So if we don't make May for Arcadia 4, it's probably going to be because we are slammed with art needs right now. But we'll let you know.
Yeah. Kingdoms of Warfare. That's gotta come out too. So
Kingdoms of Warfare, which we're in the process of wrapping up. So but there's a lot of art. There's gonna be a lot, and the art in Kingdoms of Warfare is amazing. Anyway, James, we could talk about this stuff all day. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
And thank you for managing this. No worries. We're gonna do this. I think people like this, and we will do more stuff like this in the future. Probably after every Arcadia issue, we will, if the authors are available, and it would be cool to get some of the artists in here. That would be neat. We like promoting the art and the artists as well. So thanks for hanging out, everybody. I'm going to leave it to Jerry to take the stream down once we're done signing off. Until next time, be seeing you.